When someone pretends to move on, they often rely on noise to distract. Constant activity, exaggerated displays of happiness, loud declarations of I'm fine, or public demonstrations of detachment. But the truth is, moving on isn't proven by what someone says. It's revealed by how they handle silence. Silence has a way of confronting us with what we're trying to avoid. It strips away performance. It removes the audience, and without an audience, the act ends. That's when the truth starts to surface. He might be posting pictures with new people, throwing himself into work, pretending like he's unbothered. But those things are external. They serve a purpose to convince himself, and maybe you, that he's no longer emotionally tied. But silence is different. It's internal. It's not curated. When he's alone, no text notifications, no validation, no distractions. That's when the emotional residue shows up. That's when the attachment speaks. A man can fake moving on with his words and even his actions, but silence is the test that reveals his emotional reality. If every quiet moment leads him back to thinking about you, if the absence of your presence creates discomfort rather than peace, then he's not as detached as he wants the world or himself to believe. And he may not even be conscious of it yet, that's the thing. Silence doesn't just expose what we feel, it reveals what we haven't fully processed. It forces confrontation with feelings that can't be dodged by pretending or by running toward the next distraction. Think about it, we all have a version of silence that makes us anxious. For some, it's the silence that follows a breakup. For others, it's the space between text replies or the quiet after an argument. But that discomfort is information, it's not just emptiness. It tells us what's unresolved. If he truly had no emotional attachment, silence would bring peace, not tension. It wouldn't trigger checking your Instagram stories, hovering over your number in his phone, or replaying old memories. It wouldn't create the impulse to reach out just to see how you're doing. Those reactions happen when silence becomes a mirror, when it reflects back the emotional connection that still exists, no matter how well it's been hidden. So if you're wondering whether he's really over you, don't look at the noise. Look at how he handles silence. Is he comfortable in it, or does he fill it with distraction? Does he sit with it, or does he run from it? Does it bring him relief, or does it lead him straight back to thoughts of you? That's where the truth lives. Not in the performance, not in the pretending, but in the quiet. Because when the world stops watching and the noise dies down, this doesn't lie. Absolutely. Here's the expanded version of the second keynote, a performance versus truth in the same emotionally intelligent, educational tone inspired by Hussey. There's a huge difference between performing that you've moved on and actually moving on. And a lot of people get caught up in the performance. It's the social media game, the curated photos, the stories with new faces, the gym selfies, the sudden flood of positivity. He might look like he's thriving. He might even say, I'm better off now, or it's for the best. But here's the thing, truth doesn't need an audience and healing isn't loud. When someone is truly over a relationship, they don't need to announce it. They don't need to perform it. They just are over it. The performance exists because there's still a part of him that wants to be seen by you, maybe to show you what you're missing. Maybe to convince himself he's fine. Maybe both. But when someone is truly detached, they're not fixated on how they appear. They're focused inward, not outward. So when he's deliberately trying to show you that he's moved on, that's already a signal he hasn't. Think about it like this. Performers go on stage to play a role. The moment the curtain falls and the audience disappears, the role ends, the truth returns. In the same way, if he's acting like he's moved on only when others are watching, or when he thinks you're watching, then it's a performance, not a reflection of his emotional reality. When he's alone, when he's not being seen, what version of him shows up? That's the one that matters. Another way to look at it is this. Moving on doesn't need to prove anything. It doesn't seek reaction. It doesn't require validation. But performing that you've moved on is full of intention. Every post, every flirtation, every mention of how great life is now is an action designed to provoke something. Jealousy, regret, attention, a response. It's a strategy, not a state of mind. And that difference matters. Because when someone is still strategizing around you, even negatively, it means they're still emotionally connected. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And someone who is genuinely indifferent doesn't spend their time trying to craft a message to show you they've moved on. What we need to learn, and this is vital, is not to fall for the highlight reel. Don't get thrown off by his presentation. Watch for congruence. Do his words and actions match when no one's watching? Do they line up in private the same way they do in public? The moment someone feels the need to show they're fine is often the moment they're least fine. The truth of emotional detachment is quiet, simple, and doesn't need an audience. But the performance, it's loud, reactive, and temporary. So don't confuse the noise for closure. The performance isn't the truth. The truth is what happens in the quiet, in the unposted moments, when there's no one to impress, especially not you, sir. Here's the expanded version of the third keynote, emotional residue delivered in an educational, psychologically aware tone inspired by Hussey. When a relationship ends, it doesn't just switch off like a light. Emotions don't obey the calendar or follow a schedule. You can unfollow someone, delete their number, block their stories, but the emotional residue still lingers. That residue is the invisible imprint of the bond, the unspoken connection that doesn't disappear just because you say, I'm over it. And this is where a lot of people get it wrong. They assume that because someone isn't reaching out, because they're not expressing sadness, or because they seem fine, the feelings are gone. But emotions aren't always loud. Sometimes they whisper through the cracks. He might not show up in your inbox, but he still shows up in subtle moments. In the way he avoids certain songs, in the hesitation before liking something you post, in the fact that he still brings your name up in random conversations, even in casual ways. These are the signs of emotional residue, a kind of leftover energy that hasn't been cleared out. And the most powerful thing about it is that it shows up despite someone's efforts to suppress it. We carry emotional residue the same way we carry scents on our clothes after we've walked through a room filled with perfume. You may not even realize it's there until you're alone, until something triggers a memory. Then it hits you. That's what happens with unresolved emotional attachment. And while someone can appear to have moved on, if they haven't done the emotional housekeeping, the processing, the reflecting, the real letting go, then the residue remains. It shows up in silence, in stillness, because those are the moments where there's no distraction to drown it out. When you're busy, it's easy to pretend you're over someone. But what about at night? Or when you're triggered by a smell, a place, a movie, or a song you once shared? Those moments expose the truth that hasn't been fully dealt with. And this is crucial to understand, not just for interpreting someone else's behavior, but for your own healing too. You might wonder, if he's not talking to me, doesn't that mean he's let go? Not necessarily. Silence isn't always absence. Sometimes it's struggle. Sometimes it's avoidance. Sometimes it's an inner fight between ego and emotion, because reaching out means vulnerability. But staying quiet doesn't mean peace. It might just mean conflict is happening beneath the surface. Emotional residue can't be faked away or covered. You can pretend to move on, but if you haven't truly processed what happened, if you haven't faced the grief, the guilt, the love, the pain, then those emotions stay with you. They affect your behavior. They affect your next relationship. They bleed into the silences. That's why silence is so revealing. Not because it proves detachment, but because it often proves the opposite. That the emotional thread is still very much alive, just buried under layers of performance, pride, and pain. Absolutely. Here's the expanded version of the fourth keynote. Avoidance is not healing, written in an educational, psychologically insightful tone similar to Matthew Hussey's approach. There's a big misunderstanding people have when it comes to getting over someone. They think that if they avoid the person, the pain will go away. If they delete the photos, mute the messages, and distract themselves with new people or endless to-do lists, then they've healed. But avoidance is not healing. Avoidance is just pushing the pain to the side. It doesn't dissolve the emotions. It simply delays the work of processing them. When someone is emotionally attached but pretending to be over it, they often turn to avoidance as their coping. He might say, "I'm done," and cut off contact, not because he's at peace, but because facing you stirs up feelings he doesn't want to deal with. The silence in this case isn't closure. It's a shield. He's not ready to sit in the discomfort of those emotions, so he runs from them instead. He convinces himself that as long as he's not engaging with you, he's healing. But deep down, all he's really doing is compartmentalizing the pain and hoping it fades on its own. The issue is emotional wounds don't heal just because we stop looking at them. You can't ignore a broken leg and expect it to repair itself properly. You have to tend to it. The same is true with the heart. Healing requires confrontation. It demands that we sit in uncomfortable truths, that we admit what we feel, even when it makes us vulnerable. And for many people, especially those who aren't used to emotional honesty, that's terrifying. So instead they avoid, they distract, they pretend. But beneath the silence, the feelings remain unprocessed and unresolved. Avoidance can look strong on the surface. It can even feel like power. But it's often rooted in fear, not strength. Fear of what might come up if they admit they're not truly over you. Fear of appearing weak. Fear of reopening emotional doors that were never properly closed. And in many cases, avoidance isn't just about you. It's also about them not wanting to face their own role in the breakup. It's easier to suppress than to reflect. It's easier to ghost than to grieve. But the emotions they don't deal with now will catch up to them later. In another relationship, in late-night regrets, or in moments of loneliness they don't fully understand. Healing, on the other hand, is active. It's intentional, it's reflective, and it often involves discomfort. So if you're watching someone who's pretending they've moved on, but doing everything in their power to avoid not just you, but any emotional depth, understand this. They're not ahead of you in the healing process. They're stuck. Silence in their case is not peace, it's paralysis. And until they stop avoiding what they feel, the emotional attachment doesn't fade. It festers. Here's the expanded version of the fifth keynote. A trigger's revealed truth to her, crafted in a reflective, emotionally intelligent tone similar to Matthew Hussey's teaching style. We often look for clarity in what people say or do publicly, but real emotional truth doesn't always live there. It shows up in the moments people don't plan for, the ones they don't control. These are called emotional triggers. They're those seemingly small, often random moments that pull something real out of a person. And when someone claims they've moved on, it's not their confidence that tells the story. It's how they react when a trigger catches them off guard. Triggers are unfiltered. They bypass the mental walls we build and go straight to the emotional. He might go weeks acting like nothing happened between you, but then a song plays that you both used to listen to. He scrolls past a photo from a place you visited together, or maybe he stumbles across your name in a group conversation, or sees someone who looks like you across the street. And in that moment, everything he's been suppressing bubbles to the surface. Not acting. That's not a performance. That's real emotional residue being activated. What makes triggers so important is they don't require effort. He doesn't have to choose to be affected. He just... That's why you can't fake your way past a trigger. You can't rehearse it. You can't filter it. His body will react before his mind can catch up. A sudden change in mood, an anxious look, a withdrawal from the room, a delayed response to a question. These are all signs that something inside hasn't healed. That despite how moved on he may claim to be, there's still an emotional thread connecting him to you. Sometimes people think silence means indifference, but often it's the opposite. It can be a quiet space filled with emotional landmines. Triggers are those moments when the silence cracks, and what comes through is far more revealing than any words. It's easy to control a conversation. It's easy to hide behind a post or ghost someone to maintain pride. But it's not easy to stop a memory from shaking you when it hits you out of nowhere. That's why these moments are so educational. They strip away the image and reveal the truth underneath. If you want to understand whether someone is truly over you, don't just look at the things they're choosing to do. Watch what they don't expect to feel. The triggers are the emotional slip-up, and we all have them. Healing isn't linear. People who say they've moved on often haven't faced the deeper layers of their feelings. Triggers shine a light on what still lives beneath the surface. And when those moments come, when a memory hijacks his attention or disrupts his mood, it's a strong sign that emotional attachment hasn't vanished. It's just been waiting for a moment to be heard. So, here's the expanded version of the 6th keynote. A no contact isn't just a strategy. It's a test written in an insightful, psychologically grounded style inspired by Hussey. A lot of people talk about the no contact rule as if it's a trick to get someone back or to make them miss you, but no contact, when done intentionally, is far more than just a strategy. It's a test, not just of the other person's feelings, but of their emotional maturity, their attachment, and their ability to live without your presence. It reveals the truth in a way that words and actions often can't. Because silence has a way of removing the safety nets. When you go quiet, the mask falls. Think about it this way. When you're constantly reaching out, checking in, liking their posts, or leaving the door slightly open, you're giving them emotional breadcrumbs to feed off. They don't have to wonder how you feel. They don't have to process the loss. You're giving them comfort without commitment. But the moment you go quiet, truly quiet, you remove that emotional supply, and what happens next is if he's truly moved on, your silence won't shake him. It will be neutral. If anything, it will validate what he already feels, closure. But if there's still an emotional attachment, if he's been relying on your presence to soften the blow of the breakup, then your silence becomes deafening. It creates discomfort. It forces him to confront the space you once filled, and that space suddenly feels real. Suddenly you're not just someone he used to talk to, you're gone, and that's where his truth comes out. No contact creates a vacuum. And in that vacuum, people show you who they are. Does he step forward? Does he reach out? Does he suddenly start posting more or watching your stories with renewed intensity? Or does he disappear completely because the silence is too confronting to deal with? Either way, you learn something. You're not manipulating, you're observing. You're giving space for the emotional truth to surface, unfiltered by games, unclouded by your presence. And on your end, it's a test of self-respect. It challenges you to sit with your own discomfort, to resist the urge to chase validation, to give up control over how the other person reacts. It's not easy. Silence can feel like rejection, but in reality, it's clarity, because how someone behaves in your absence is often a clearer indicator of their attachment than what they say in your presence. So when you go no contact, don't just think of it as a technique, it's a moment of truth. It gives both of you the space to feel the full weight of the separation. And if he's still emotionally attached, that silence won't sit still. It will move something in him. Maybe he reaches out, maybe he reflects. Maybe he even resists the urge, but the fact that he's affected means the emotional bond hasn't fully broken. No contact doesn't manipulate emotions, it reveals them, absolutely. Here's the expanded version of the 7th keynote, How Ego Masks Vulnerability, written in the emotionally intelligent and educational style of Hussey. When someone pretends to be over you, ego often plays the starring role. It's not necessarily because they don't care, but because they're too afraid to show they still do. Ego steps in to protect us when we feel emotionally exposed. It's the armor we wear to avoid vulnerability. So instead of saying, "Well, I miss you," he says no. Instead of reaching out, he posts pictures that suggest he's thriving. Instead of admitting he's hurting, he acts like he never was. That's not strength, that's self-protection disguised as confidence. The ego hates vulnerability because vulnerability admits need, desire, regret, and loss, all things the ego sees as weakness. So when his heart wants to reconnect, but his pride won't let him, the result is silence or deflection. He might tell mutual friends he's fine, he might even flirt with someone new in front of you. But those actions often don't come from peace, they come from pain that hasn't been processed. Ego can't sit quietly in sadness, it has to do something to make the person feel powerful again. This is especially true after a breakup. Vulnerability is raw, it's the voice that says, "I still think about you," or "I'm struggling without you." But ego wants control, not connection. It would rather rewrite the narrative to save face. That's why someone who's hurting may act like they've moved on too quickly. It's their way of convincing both themselves and others that they've won, that they're unaffected. But real emotional strength isn't about looking unbothered. It's about being honest with what's still alive inside you. Here's what's important to understand. Someone can be emotionally attached and still behave like they aren't, if their ego is in charge. He can miss you every day and still choose not to message you, simply because he doesn't want to be the one who appears weaker. He may wait watching, hoping you reach out first so he doesn't have to lower his pride. And to the outside world, this looks like indifference. But inside it's inner chaos, because what he feels and what he's showing are completely out of alignment. Ego keeps people stuck, it prevents closure, it blocks reconnection, and it creates confusion, not just for the other person trapped in it, Deep down, he might want to open up, but the fear of rejection, of not being received, of appearing a less than, becomes louder than the desire for emotional honesty. That's why silence isn't always a sign of detachment. Sometimes it's just ego winning the internal battle, and so if he's quiet, distant, or emotionally cold, don't assume that means he's healed or moved on. Sometimes it just means his ego is louder than his heart. But the emotional attachment, it's still there, hidden beneath the armor, masked by silence, protected by pride, certainly. Here's the expanded version of the 8th keynote. A silence is the loudest confession, expressed with a deep emotional insight and relational clarity inspired by Hussey style. Silence is often misunderstood. People think if someone isn't saying anything, they must not feel anything. But emotional truth isn't always loud. It doesn't always come through words, grand gestures, or emotional declarations. Sometimes it shows up in what someone doesn't say, what they can't say. And in many cases, silence isn't the absence of emotion, it's the evidence. It's the loudest confession a person can make without ever opening their mouth. When someone is truly detached from you, they can be casual, even warm. There's nothing left unresolved, no energy lingering between you. But when someone is still emotionally attached and trying desperately to pretend they're not, silence becomes their way of holding it together. It's not peace, it's pressure. It's the attempt to avoid cracking open emotions they haven't figured out how to manage. People use silence to avoid vulnerability, to keep control, to send a message without having to confront the reality behind it. But ironically, that very silence often says more than any conversation ever could. Because silence carries weight, it creates space where unresolved feelings echo. The longer it lasts, the more obvious it becomes that something is left unsaid, something that couldn't be confronted directly. That might be regret, it might be longing, it might be love that never got close. When someone cuts contact and doesn't reach out, most people rush to assume he doesn't care. But real detachment doesn't always require silence. Indifference doesn't need to withhold. It simply is. It's comfortable. But when silence feels tense, avoidant, or emotionally charged, it's not a lack of care. It's the presence of unresolved care. The silence speaks for the emotions the person doesn't feel safe or ready to articulate. And here's what most people don't realize. Silence isn't passive, it's a choice. It's what people use when they believe that saying what they truly feel might either cost them their pride or open a wound they don't know how to close. So instead, they say nothing, but their behavior changes. They watch your stories more often. They react more to others' comments about you. They avoid places you might be, or sometimes deliberately show up to them. These are not the behaviors of someone who has emotionally exited your life. They're the signs of someone who is still emotionally bound, just too afraid to express it out loud. So don't underestimate silence. Don't confuse it with indifference. It's often the biggest emotional reveal. When someone can't bring themselves to speak, it's usually not because they have nothing to say. It's because they have too much to say and no safe way to say. That's why silence, real, loaded silence, is the loudest confession of all. It doesn't lie, it doesn't perform, it simply exists, and in doing so tells you exactly what the heart has been hiding, certainly. Here is a powerful and an emotionally resonant conclusion for the entire speech, crafted in an educational, reflective style aligned with the tone of Hussey. So when you hear silence from someone who once held space in your heart, don't rush to interpret it as closed. Don't be fooled by the calm surface. Often that silence is not the end of the story. It's the part where the emotional truth quietly lingers, waiting to be acknowledged. He may fake moving on. He may smile post-laugh and carry on as if you were just another chapter. But if the silence between you feels heavy, if it carries weight rather than peace, that is not the silence of indifference. It is the silence of someone still emotionally tethered. Silence isn't just a lack of words, it's a reflection of everything that remains unsaid. The emotional residue, the suppressed vulnerability, the ego's grip, the unhealed attachments, they all show up not in his messages, but in his absence. And that absence often says far more than any carefully crafted sentence ever. The truth is, the heart can be loud even when the mouth is closed, and if you learn how to listen, not to what someone says, but to what they can't bring themselves to say, you'll start seeing silence for what it really is, a signal, a confession, a window into the parts of someone that still haven't let go. And in the end, that's the most powerful clarity you can have. Because once you stop chasing noise and start hearing what silence reveals, you stop needing validation from broken conversation. You begin trusting what you already know deep down, that emotional attachment doesn't disappear just because someone is pretending it's not there. So trust the energy, trust the stillness, trust the silence, because it may be the loudest truth he'll ever give you.